There are so many different vectors you can follow for a career in aviation that you should not hesitate to try one, even if the benefit is to learn you don't want to pursue that direction.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Welcome back, all my aviation friends, to another episode of Fly the Transition, where we'll explore yet another journey of aviation career transformation. On today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Gary Palmer. Not Greg, Gary. It's a little inside joke between he and I because I called him the wrong name the first time I emailed him. At any rate, we'll talk about Gary's transition from working in information security for satellite systems to becoming a CFI and really an advocate and mentor for student pilots. But before my interview with Gary, I have one huge announcement that I want to share. This is something that's been in the works in the background for the last couple of months, but if you are going to AirVenture this year, specifically July 26th at 11:30, Forum Stage 6, I am so excited to announce that the Fly Midwest podcast will be hosting an aviation podcaster meet and greet and listener question and answer forum. So you can connect with some of your favorite aviation podcast personalities representing a wide range of industry topics. You can ask questions and you can stick around to meet and chat with the hosts. This is going to be a great opportunity to connect with fellow fans and maybe even discover your next aviation must-listen to podcast. So for sure, we'll have myself and the Badger pilot from Fly Midwest podcast, Jason Miller from the Finer Points, Ian from AvTalk podcast from Flight Radar 24, and we're in conversations with many more to try to work out some schedules and to make this a really fun way to connect with other aviation podcasts. So that should be a really fun event, and I hope to see some of you out there at AirVenture this year. The other bit of news is I've been really busy doing interviews today and through this week, so more exciting episodes will be coming up in the future here, so I hope that you'll continue to listen to Fly the Transition. And if you like what you're hearing, please share this with others to help inspire those who might be looking to make a change into the aviation industry. All right, so let's get into this episode's interview with Gary Palmer. Now, I really connected with Gary as we went through this interview because the path he is on is one I hope to go down myself one day, of completing a career, retiring, and then moving into flight instructing. And admittedly, personally for me, we do go a bit down that rabbit hole of talking about what it's like to be an independent flight instructor and kind of making your own way in that space. So with that said, off to our interview with Gary. Well, Gary, I'm so excited to have you on this episode of Fly the Transition. I think that we're going to have some interesting stuff to talk about. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here and to share what my experiences are and some of my lessons learned, and hopefully help others learn from my lessons.
That's what it's about. Learning, inspiring, mentoring, all that stuff. So I'm going to start off with a fairly common question I ask on these episodes. And how were you first exposed to aviation?
I think that would have to go back to my teenage years. Actually, I was in college and needed a distraction from being in college.
Yeah.
And I went and took a class and did parachuting. And after that, I did a glider lesson. And I thought, this is really cool. I just can't afford it. So it was a good distraction, but it was not a pursuit at that time.
Yeah, that's an expensive distraction.
Over the years, as I developed in my career, I did the occasional discovery flight. Just go, oh yeah, that's really neat. And my wife came to realize that I always appreciated being in the air. And at a school fundraiser, she bid on and won a flight with a friend, and he flew us from Torrance Airport up to Santa Ynez, which is, and it was in a 172, probably under, give or take an hour. But he let me take the controls and fly the plane, and he did some explaining. And I was like, this is not only fun, but it's a very cool thing to be able to come up here, because driving would be a couple hours. And I did a few other discovery flights on my own after that. But honestly, when I departed from my employer in 2009, I had a bonus that my wife said, why don't you use that and take flying lessons? Now, I have to confess, it wasn't sufficient to cover the cost of flying lessons because we had no idea what that would mean.
Right.
But I spent it all, and I was having so much fun, and we could afford. So I was able to continue. And it has been full steam ahead ever since then. The discovery flight that truly started me was on May 1st, 2009. And I just started lessons. I got my private, flew around to some, and realized, Southern California, we always have this marine layer, and I hear all this stuff about instrument.
Yeah. And
decided I'm going to get my instrument rating so I can fly more frequently and be safer. I was always looking at it as, if I fly every flight as if my family is in the plane, would I fly every flight?
Right.
So I got the instrument, then commercial, and my tail wheel, my high performance, continued on, and finally got my CFI.
You just kept plugging away there, didn't you?
I did, and I do. And actually, I'm in the middle. No, not in the middle. I am way further down the road towards my double I.
Good for you. That's awesome.
I'm hoping in the next month or two.
Okay, good for you. So we talked a bit about like how you got exposed to aviation here again, but you clearly took a different path with your life before you got into aviation. So what were you going to college for?
My undergraduate in college was computer science, and I was a developer of operating systems and system software. That was my job when I went to school in Rochester, New York. I got so tired of winters in New York.
Oh, I can imagine.
I took the opportunities and said, I'm moving south of the Mason-Dixon line, and I had opportunities in Florida, Texas, and California.
Okay.
And California seemed the most fun. It was also the lowest paying, but the most fun promising. And this was before we talked of life balance and, work-life balance, but I thought I'm going to go to California. So that was my undergraduate.
I'd imagine, too, that you said it was lower pay, but I'd imagine that with the places that you listed, it's lower humidity rate, too?
It was. And, I moved out here not knowing anyone, and the people that I work with, it was sort of like a think tank, a lot of younger people. And I just kept hearing, oh, you don't know where to live, because I moved out here. I was living in a hotel for the first month trying to figure out. And they're like, oh, well, where you should live is really simple. Any city that ends in the word beach is a great place to live.
That's a great point.
It was great advice. And I looked around and I couldn't find anything I could afford, but I found someone looking for a roommate. And I was like, well, I'm going to rent a bedroom and I have a bathroom, and I will share the apartment here. And that is how I started. And while I was doing that, while I was working, I went back to school and I got a master's in psychology. And human factors, how people and machines interact. And only now, as a flight instructor, I can look back and I realize that some of what I learned then applies so well to what I do now.
I can imagine.
So it sort of set me up for the transition before I knew there would be a transition.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, those are very related.
Absolutely.
So what type of work do you end up getting into out there that you can talk about?
Well, yeah, I can comfortably say that there were a few career transitions that were prior to flying. My first one, I was doing a major operating system. So I'm old. It's gray hair and stuff. I'm old enough that I predate the personal computers. So they were mainframe operating systems, and I was on the cusp of helping develop one of the most modernized mainframe operating systems. And I was writing software for that. Then from there, I went to a company where I was working with the smaller computers and still doing programming work and some design work. From that, I got into startups and still computer software, but not specifically where my foundation was, but I could draw from. So I was in startups and then other companies that were software, but I slowly moved into security. And how do you secure the computer? And this was in the 90s that I started doing a lot about computer security. I was engaged on helping to secure the systems I was working on, and I stayed focused in that. And that was the crux of what I did for the rest of my career while I was prior to moving into flight instruction and aviation. So I was always doing computer security. I did it for a number of customers at my second to last company. And then my last company, I was in their satellite systems division, and I was in charge of designing the security on a number of satellite systems.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. And I assume because we're talking about security of satellite systems, we won't get too in the weeds. But so what exactly does that entail? So satellites, as they're flying around up there, they perform at least two functions. One is to just stay in orbit and not fly away from the Earth and not burn up entering the Earth, unless they're commanded to do that, because that's how we get rid of them nowadays. Sure.
But keep them in orbit, and then whatever the mission is, you get communication satellites that receive a radio signal from one side of the Earth and relay it to another. So they act as a relay. Others that will get a signal from somewhere and transmit it to a whole bunch of places, like dish antenna and some of the the satellite TV companies. So there's one antenna beaming it up, and on the satellite, it gets beamed down to all sorts of receivers all over. It could be all over the hemisphere that satellite covers. So that's the mission of the satellite. A lot of satellites can have multiple missions where it could do radio transmissions and have a space telescope looking out at the stars. Okay. So you're keeping the thing orbiting. You're telling it where to point to take a picture. You're telling it when to take a picture. You're telling it who to send the picture to. And that can apply to many different types of cameras and opticals. And all of those things are managed by data signals going up or down from the satellite. And if somebody is able to interfere with those signals, then it's potential that the data coming down would be disrupted. You have an outage on your satellite TV. Or the data going up is interrupted, and you still have an outage on your TV. Or the commanding of the satellite is interrupted, and it could be nefarious, where suddenly the satellite is now out of commission. And everyone's scrambling, going, what are we going to do? And there's lots of companies put multiple satellites up in case one dies, because sometimes they just die natural death.
Sure. Will
something else take over and cover it? We look at our GPS and we say, well, you need 4 satellites in view for basic and 5 for WAS or 6 for WAS. And it just goes up. And there's spares. There are spare satellites in orbit. So if one of them just dies with age or whatever, hit by a meteor, there's others that can pick up the slack. So we're trying to protect them from nefarious people trying to command or control or dispose of the satellites, or from taking over. Let's turn the Hubble Space Telescope to look into the sun and burn out its optics, or let's turn it to the ground and spy on whoever we can.
Yeah, I thought that's probably about what it was going to be entailing as far as making sure that there are no nefarious acts against those type of devices, because that can obviously have some consequences that are wider reaching than we're probably thinking. So,
yes, the U.S. has not made any attempt to conceal the fact for pilots that we have to be able to expect GPS outages and navigate accordingly. The purpose of the MON network is exactly that. And we have GPS outages, and there's GPS jamming that goes on. There's a website that even tracks it.
So how long were you doing security for satellite systems?
Over 25 years.
Yeah, I suppose over 25 years, too, you've got a lot of evolution of technologies and things like that, too, that you have to contend with.
Oh, yeah. It takes a long time. It took a long time to get a satellite designed, built, tested, and flown. So, there was always the joke that the computers on board the space shuttle were lower powered than your cell phone.
Yeah.
And it's true, because the space shuttle was designed and then it had to go through all the process that when it flew, the hardware on board was already considered, outdated or ancient. But it was all tested. Everything was working. And, if you change it all out, you have to test it all again.
I think when I first thought about satellite systems and the work that you'd be doing with it, I just assumed like once it's up in flight and, control stuff there, I didn't necessarily think about there's probably work going on the ground too before it even gets up there.
Oh, yeah.
To make sure that those are secure.
Yes, there's a lot of work that goes on the ground to get before it goes up. And even after it's in orbit, they're called ground stations. And depending on what the satellite's purpose is, there could be one ground station or several ground stations scattered around the world so that one of them is always able to communicate to the satellite. And it used to be these were purpose-built ground stations, and more it's becoming a ground station that can support a number of satellites so that the cost per satellite supported becomes much, much lower.
Interesting.
But yeah, there's a whole lot of that. And sometimes they go online, which they're not always supposed to do. Someone plugs in the wrong wire. But yeah, there's a lot of security. There's also a lot of physical security trying to keep people out of the buildings.
Sure. So when you moved out of working in satellite systems, was it just a natural period for retirement, or was it to look towards doing something different? What did that look like for you?
Being in the security realm is not the easiest career option, especially in satellites. The bulk of the engineers who I worked with had originally started with the attitude, the satellite's up in orbit in space. What kind of security risk is there?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, all these signals and everything and all the data. And they're like, it's all encrypted. What kind of... And yeah, they were stuck in this. We encrypt our data. It's out in space, unreachable. What's the problem? And there were times I had to resort to the simple, because the customer put this in the contract. And they're like, yeah, the necessary evil. So there were times it just wasn't as much fun. And I used to work on proposals also, and it got to be less fun. It was enjoyable. I had a lot of enjoyment doing it. I was interacting with others. I was on a team where I could help and do a lot of mentoring. And in order to save costs and everything else on programs, it'd be like, okay, you're the only guy out there on this program now. So I'd be all by myself and fighting amongst other engineers because they didn't want me to tell them what needed to be done.
Sure.
So the excitement waned. And at the same time, I'm going through all my flight training, and I realized, I could retire soon and just pick up as a CFI without a need to generate any kind of required income.
Sure.
Which allows me to pick and choose, allows me to fly when I want. And it became the natural transition. I had thought about retirement 10 years before I did. I retired in 22. And I hadn't thought of flying as being something I will be doing much of in retirement other than personal fun.
Sure.
But as I continued through the different certifications, I realized, I've always done mentoring and training, and I would like to do more. And what I realized was that there's a lot of student pilots, and myself included at one point, where I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what the path would lead to, and I didn't have anyone to ask questions of other than my instructor. And I always got his opinion on it. And that sort of helped me focus on what I would do as I retired.
So at that point, where were you at with your ratings? Were you working towards instructor? Were you an instructor before you retired? Or what did that look like for you?
I was an instructor before I retired.
Okay.
I had about 3 to 4 years of instruction prior to retirement. After I got my instructor rating, I realized there's 4 flight schools at my airport, and I have experience with 3 of the 4. And what I realized was that I have an attitude, or some would say maybe an attitude problem, but I had an attitude about what I thought a flight school should do, and I didn't align with how these other schools were working.
Okay.
Now, one of them, I literally heard their chief instructor telling the instructors, your job is to get the prop spinning as soon as possible, because that's when we're generating revenue on the rental, and you're generating time in your logbook. And the school was promoting that all their instructors are compensated not by money, but by hours.
Yeah.
So, I heard that, and I'm thinking, where are the students? Aren't you supposed to give priority to your students? Aren't you worried about making good students, or are you worried about spending time on the prop? And it got me looking around and talking to others, and I realized that was happening in a lot of places. So I decided I'll be independent. I unfortunately do not teach in my own plane, so I help people in theirs. I've done commercial. I've done 1 CFI. I've done 1 private pilot before, and I have 1 right now who is really close to his practical.
Nice. You talked about how you're an independent CFI, and I think there's some people that are out there like myself that that's my end goal. Like when I retire from law enforcement, that's what I want to do, because we're fortunate enough to be able to retire in our early 50s. So I personally want to develop my flight instructing independent business and then be able to just transition right into that. For those who are not as familiar with that route, what does it look like for you to get into the business side of being a flight instructor and being an independent flight instructor on your own?
It is bumpy. Being an independent means that I'm searching and trying to find my own customers. I don't have a school advertising. I'm looking at word of mouth. I'm looking at some of my publications to try and help bring people in. And my student pilot advocacy has resulted in people coming and asking, could you teach me? And there's limitations on that. I mentioned that I don't teach in my plane. I have 172. Just finished putting a new engine in it. It has over 10,000 hours on the airframe. It has been through a lot over the years prior to me as a trainer and just a workhorse. And as my wife put it once, she's due a good retirement.
Yeah.
The other side is that I looked very seriously at what do I want to do in my teaching and how much teaching do I want to do. And that became a factor when I looked at the insurance. In order for me to teach in my plane, the insurance would go up about $8,000 a year.
Okay.
And I was looking at, what will it take to cover that? And how much teaching do I need to do? And I started to look at it and say, that turns it into like a serious job. And I enjoy teaching. I don't want another serious job. I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy flying with people when they're ready and they're available. The students who I'm working towards their certificates, they tell me when they're available, and I'm retired, so it works.
Yeah.
But I've flown with and fly with a number of people who aren't looking towards a certificate. They're looking for somebody who can help tune them up. So I have a lot of good avionics, the Garmin avionics stacks, the current and the older ones. So I know how those work, and I can teach a lot on those. Whether or not I'm doing instrument work doesn't matter, because this is just helping them learn.
Yeah.
So I find that. I've also found that I've become quite the stickler on radio communications, and I hear so many people with the wrong things out there. And looking at some of the safety reports and hearing the FAA's consideration of, accurate communications are important. And yet I hear a pilot get told, okay, fly this heading, maintain 3,000 feet. And they just key the mic and say, Roger, and then they let go.
That's not right.
And totally not right. And yet on Saturday, I heard exactly that. And that's a thing for me. So helping with the radios now, of course, that also means that some pilots are like, hey, can you help me? And then I start helping them, and they're like, yeah, you're too picky, and it's not a good fit, because they don't want to. I think what they're looking for is someone to say, oh, you're doing great. You're perfect. Don't worry about it.
Right.
And yet there's more. Finding the niches like that, improving communications, learning better how to use the avionics you have, trimming rust off. I published what I call a safety net. And if you took the ACS even for private pilot, and you go through the maneuvers that you'd perform in the air, the FAA says, well, you have to do slow flight plus 10 minus 0 to whatever the speed is that's real close to your stall speed. Okay, great. So if you picture a bicycle wheel, and each spoke represents one of those maneuvers. It's called a polar plot. I learned it in my engineering days. But each spoke is a maneuver, and we'll call this spoke is the slow flight. Now, if you can't do it at all, you get a 0. You're right at the hub. If you can do it, but you really have trouble maintaining your speed correctly, it's a 1. If you do it, and most of the time you're within the spec, the ACS required capability, it's a 2. And if you can do it consistently, good, within spec, it's a 3. And you basically want 0 is at the core, 1, 2, and 3 is right at the rim of the wheel, on the outer edge. And that's slow flight. Now add in soft field takeoff, soft field landings, short field, steep turns, surge ramp point, S turns, add in all the maneuvers, and those are all the spokes. Put a point on each spoke for where your skills are. And that's your proficiency envelope. I call it your safety net, because those are the skills that if you are drawing upon them due to some emergency, you can perform them with some reliable expectation of outcome.
So it sounds like you're doing, and this makes sense as I think about it. It's not as much I'm going to take a student from 0 to, private, instrument, commercial. Right. You're doing, you're helping people brush up. You're helping people get proficient again. You're helping people become and maintain a certain amount of proficiency and safety in the aircraft. Is that about
yes,
that up?
That's a very good way to sum it up. Students that are going through a certificate, very few. People who are students who are existing pilots or just want me to fly with them while they're a student. I don't typically do it, but occasionally I will take someone. If I get to know somebody through the mentoring and the consultation and they're local, I will offer them, hey, would you like to come flying with me?
Sure.
And I'll take them up, not necessarily as a lesson with them in the cockpit for me to instruct them, but for me to give them some experience and expose them to how I would do something. I had one gal from Florida who was out here for a little bit, and she was having a lot of trouble with S-turns. And I said, well, why don't we go find a day where you can join me and we'll go flying. And I gave her, through my hours and experience, I've gained a lot of, I have a trick here, a tip here. This is a different way to do this. Or just let's dissect that maneuver into little tiny pieces and work on each piece before we try putting them all together.
Sure.
And it really helped her. Another kid who I have been mentoring, he's hopefully this week going for his commercial check ride. Nice. And he was having difficulty with lazy eights because they were always, okay, you have to do the 45 degree, 90 degree, 135 degrees, and 108 degrees. And he's all busy trying to find all those points and do it. And I said, when all is said and done and working right, the nose of your plane is going to go up over the horizon, a nice curve, come down below the horizon, a nice curve, come back up, and end on the horizon again. And that's half of the 8. And then you go the other way, and boom, now you have a lazy 8. It fell over, it's sleeping.
Yep.
And he's like, never thought of that, never heard that. So I try to offer ways and help them improve on their skills, whether it's flight or communication.
Yeah, that's a good point on, I know that this isn't a flight instructing podcast, but that's a good point on the lazy eights, because I think there are some that get so hung up on 45, 90, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of my experience doing lazy eights, if you set up correctly, the plane kind of wants to do what you have it do. You don't have to like fight it or force it at a certain point. You just have to, you got to swoop, essentially. You just let it swoop.
Swoop, exactly. And I say, I tell people that the lazy 8 is my favorite maneuver because
I love lazy 8.
It's a little bit of setup, and when it goes correctly, it feels wonderful.
Yeah, it's just fun. Swoop around.
Yeah, just going and swooping and coming back and going, oh, hey, look, I'm on heading, I'm at altitude. It all worked.
I knew there's something I liked about you, Gary. You mentioned something about, and we got this turned into a CFI conversation, but we're going to live here for a minute.
It's okay.
You mentioned lesson plans, and you created your own. Did you do the same thing for your initial, or are you just doing that now for instrument, or what does that look like for you? I'm just curious on just the different takes that are out there about making your own lesson plans versus using something that's commercially available.
So I did not create my own for my regular. For my CFI, I did go to a school, but it was not one of those 5-day schools. It took a little over a month. And I actually don't hold that school in high regard for what was done there because there was a lot I ended up having to learn on my own.
Sure.
But as far as lesson plans go, my belief isn't that you create lesson plans in order to present them to students. You create lesson plans because you're going to solidify the knowledge you have and capture the knowledge that you thought you had but don't have, and capture all of that in a way that when you review your lesson plan, you go, oh yeah, that's how that thing works. That's what this does. So the lesson plans are to help you remember all the things you have to cover because there's so much that you want to cover and might want to say. I have so much detail in mind. I pity the student that I forced to actually sit through if I ever did every page. But I will review every page, and I have graphics in there so that I can be talking to it, flip to a page and go, okay, here's the graphic to help represent what I'm talking about. And now we move on. And, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. So I didn't have that in my CFI training, and that's where I think the lesson plans should have been. The person who was actually teaching the course commented, you guys didn't make your own lesson plans? And everyone in class said, no, we were told to just have a set of lesson plans available when we came in. And his comment was, oh, God, that was wrong. You should have all created your own. But he didn't go anywhere further with that. And some people think, okay, you have to teach from your lesson plan. No, the lesson plan is to teach you what you're going to say. If you purchase a lesson plan set from somewhere else, there's one of, I guess, 3 things that have to happen. Either you teach yourself how to teach based off of those lesson plans, you start modifying them to make them into your lesson plans, which isn't a bad thing because it ends up being your plans with all of your content.
Sure.
Or they teach you what and how to teach based on their lesson plans. And as I know from my psychology and from the fundamentals of instruction, everyone interacts differently. And for them to tell me this is how you teach using our lesson plan probably won't work because I know my brain works different.
Yeah, 100%.
And I know what works for me. So for someone to tell me, say this, isn't good.
I, too, prefer the concept of writing my own lesson plans for exactly the reason you just said. It has helped me learn in my own style how I will teach it, as opposed to, it's not a word-for-word script of how I'm going to go over something. It's bullet points. It is images, illustrations, and diagrams. And I will say I'm spoiled with the setup I currently have at our hangar, where I can just use my laptop and then just mirror it over to the TV screen, and I will just pull that up as I go through my lessons with my instructor and go, all right, we'll pull up this diagram here, and let's talk about steep turns. Then we'll talk through the maneuver with the image up on there, just right out of the, out of the FAA handbooks. So
yep.
It's been working for me so far.
Yeah, it's a great, what works is what you should use, and you should be open to, and let's change it to if we come up with a way that can work better. For the private pilot students that I have had or have, I've always been very cautious about explaining, this is what the FAA is looking for. I want to see something more, and I want you aware that I'm going outside of the scope that is being requested, because the FAA has to set the bar this high.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean this is a great pilot. And I've had people go, well, my favorite 305-hour, 310-hour pilot gets their CFI. And my comment was, congratulations. That's amazing. You got it so quick. When will you start teaching? I have students lined up for tomorrow.
Oh, no.
And I thought, oh, this is terrible. It is. And the idea that you have to have some experience, you have to have some knowledge to work from, and you have to be able to dispel myths. That person with those few hours learned the absolute. And when I asked them, do you think that you're ready? His answer, the FAA thinks I am. And I didn't go any further. Elsewhere, I've expressed more my opinion, where I'm going, the FAA sets the bar of what the minimums are. And people say, well, what do you call a doctor who graduates at the bottom of his class?
A doctor.
And of course, the answer is doctor. And I say, and what do you call that doctor 5 years later? And they go, doctor. I said, what does the insurance company call that doctor 5 years later? And they pause. And I go, high risk.
Yeah, right.
So do you want the high, and that doctor only has one person's life on the operating table. Do you want that high-risk pilot to have 450 people's lives at their fingertips in an airplane? Or do you want the pilot to be better than the absolute minimum required?
So you talked here about dispelling the myths within flight training a bit. What are some of those myths specifically that you're really wanting to bust?
The very first that comes to mind is that as a student pilot, the pilot who you've gone on your discovery flight with is the instructor you'll have. You go to a flight school, you get your discovery flight. The pilot who flies the discovery is typically one who's trying to add more students to their roster. So the expectation is if you go to the flight school, you're going to work with that person. And they're on their best behavior because they want to suck you into being a student with them. So the first myth is that you don't have to go to school or your first instructor does not have to be the one who you do your discovery with. Another is do discoveries at multiple schools because you have to learn a little bit about the culture of the school.
Yeah, that's a good point.
the different schools, the different cultures, one will be a better fit than the other because they are different, and get the feel for it. One of the schools that's local absolutely caters to younger people. If you were in your midlife, and I'll say over 30, you'd feel, God, they must talk about me like grandfather out here. Because it's predominantly teenagers and some in their 20s. So, you need the right culture. The instructor is the God who knows exactly what's going on and how to do it. I trust implicitly. No, the instructor should be giving you feedback, tell you, if you think of training as traveling a road, the instructor should be telling you how far down the road you are. What's coming up next? Are we going to hit an intersection? Are we going to hit train tracks and have to stop for a crossing? Will there be a bridge or a ferry and we have to wait the ferry appointment? Those are all different things that come up during our path of training. And the instructor is supposed to have this. A lot of times they'll hand you a syllabus and then they don't really follow it. And they don't really track you to it. So you're looking at going, okay, this says everything and I'll figure out for myself. So, you have that. And it's always helpful if they give you something written. I've seen logbooks where it just says, and I don't have anything wrong with this, but I just think it's incomplete, where it will just have a reference to the FAR saying, continue training for solo, they wouldn't even say that. It would just say the FAR reference. And I don't pretend to memorize all the numbers, so I'm not even going to try it. But it would just have the 61.93. And you're like, oh, did you do 100% of it or part of it? And, what was good, what wasn't good, give a little bit more feedback. And the students don't know what to look at. For my students and the people I work with, I ask, are you doing your own logbooks? Well, no, my instructor always fills out the logbook and he hands it back to me like it's a gift from heaven. How many times have you gotten a logbook and they hand it to you, either two hands or one, but it's always open to the page with this, I've completed everything in here. All you get to look and go, wow, that's wonderful. As opposed to, you should be doing these entries yourself. And learn how. And I'll make sure they're right. I will oversee them. That's fine. But hey, we just flew. What are you going to put in the logbook? Because learning to log your time is important.
Yeah.
And it's not something that gets taught. Now, I don't have, honestly, I didn't bring my Bill of Rights and put it up on my screen for me to look at and call it point by point. A lot of what I'm saying is in there because I go over it so many times. A lot of it is about the status of your training and that you have a right to know what is the status, where are you at in your training, and have something that shows you. So if you decide I'm going to another school, you go there, you sit down with the chief instructor and say, hey, look, here's where I've been. Here's what I've been doing. And they'll look through it and they go, okay, that looks good. It looks like you're about here as far as what we're concerned with and how we teach. But we'd want to do an hour just to verify that these things are working. That's a lot better than what I actually heard at one school. Well, let's go fly for an hour and I'll see how you're doing. Now, he didn't look at my logbook. He didn't look at anything. It was a new to me instructor because I told the chief instructor, I am not meshing with the one that I have. I want someone else. There was no communications within the instructors within the one school. I was told, okay, here's a new one, and I think it'll work better for you. And the chief instructor knew me. So he's like, I think this will work better for you, Gary. Here you go. Okay, fine. So I meet the guy. We talk for an hour on the ground. And they says, okay, that all sounds good. Let's go fly for an hour, and I'll see how you can do. Now, the hour on the ground was initiated when I said, and this was for instrument stuff, I said, I don't understand how this works. So the hour was really just explaining that one thing. It wasn't, how are you doing? Where are you at? What else have you done? It was, I'll explain this. Now, let's go fly and I'll see how everything else goes. And I said, wait a minute, you don't. And he's like, don't worry. You'll do fine. You'll get benefit. we flew for an hour, and he just do this, and I would do it and go, okay, that's good. Do this. I'd do it. And it was all that. There was no actual instruction. And when we finished, I got the bill for the hour of ground, hour of flight, and I thought I was ripped off. And I went to the chief instructor. I said, I have a problem here. And I explained what it was. He was very understanding, sympathetic, and active. And he refunded me for the entire lesson. Said, I'm going to oversee the next lesson you have, and it'll be somebody else. And I'll make sure that you are with, somebody that works.
Sure.
And he did. He fixed it. And I thought, I had the guts to go in and say, I don't like this and it's not working. How many people don't? Kinds of things. Long answer to your question of myths.
So I want to talk about some things you covered here, because I believe you've done some writing in the space of student pilot advocacy.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So, as I mentioned, a lot of student pilots don't know what they can and can't do. They don't understand the environment. And I wrote something that I call the Student Pilot Bill of Rights. And the purpose of the Student Pilot Bill of Rights, my guide was it had to fit one page. And as you probably can tell, for me to get something one page is a squeeze. But it had to fit one page. And basically, it's things like you can choose different instructors. You can choose different schools. You're supposed to get feedback for your flights so that you know how you did. You're supposed to get a pre-brief so you know what you're going to do. You're supposed to have status for where you are in a program that is aimed at getting you to. So I wrote that, and I've put out multiple other articles just to help people understand. And nowadays I'll characterize and say, you are a consumer of aviation education. If you are not happy with the provider of your service, why not change? And I get all sorts of arguments and pushbacks, but the end answer is, if you've learned something and you go to another instructor or school, they'll want to see that you've learned it, but you'll then demonstrate it, and they'll go, oh yeah, you did know that. Let's move on.
Right.
So it may be a 1 hour flight. So you lose an hour, but you gain an hour of experience and time spent with someone watching over. And if something isn't quite right, they'll help and correct. So it's a beneficial hour. And now you have an option to fly with someone who you might mesh better with.
Right. I heard someone at one point say that finding a good instructor is like finding a good pair of shoes. Not every pair of shoes are going to fit you. So
Sure.
I think in that same conversation, they said, if this instructor doesn't fit, fire your CFI. Like you're paying them to provide you, just like you said, you're paying them to provide you a service. If they're not meeting up to their end of the bargain, fire your CFI.
Yes, it's exactly right. And saying it as fire your CFI is draconian and dramatic, and so
it really is.
To draw it. We get that, but it is true. It is absolutely true. If they're not providing you the service that you desire, you have an obligation to yourself to find someone who fits better, provides what you're looking for, and it's probably about communication, because that's where I've always noticed that. Yeah, this one isn't working well. Why not? Well, they don't communicate. I never get a post-flight briefing. I get an email. I don't have a discussion. Fine. That's a great observation. Find someone else. I have, I think, a unique experience. I had a CFI fire me as their student.
No kidding.
Yeah. It was in my IFR training, and I am very pragmatic. I really like to learn and dig in and understand what I'm doing and how things work. And as my wife says, well, that's a perfect thing about you for being a pilot, because you'll be very safe. But because I kept asking questions and diving in, he was getting frustrated with me.
Yeah.
And he finally sent me an email, didn't do it to my face. He sent me an email and he said, I think the best thing for you for your instrument rating is to go to one of those schools that promises your IFR in 5 days, because all you'll ever probably do with it is punch through the marine layer, which is 500 to 1,000 feet thick. You'll be above the clouds, and then you'll fly somewhere, and there'll be a VFR landing. So that's all you'll ever need. And good luck, but I'm not going to instruct you any longer. And I was like, oh my God, it was wild.
Yeah. Now, I know in your work you also talk about the term the savvy student. So tell me a bit more about that.
And I picked it up, Savvy Student, because I like Greg Brown. Greg Brown publishes a great book, The Savvy Flight Instructor. And if I were building a business for myself where I was teaching in my own aircraft and really making a business of it, I recommend his book immediately because it's so good. And I said, Greg, I'm going to borrow from you and call it The Savvy Student, trying to make someone a smart enough consumer that they can effectively and efficiently purchase aviation training and go through it.
So is this in addition to the Student Pilot Bill of Rights and that kind of advocacy, or is this all mixed together?
God, great question.
That's why they pay me the big bucks on this podcast of $0 per episode to ask them questions.
No, it really makes me wonder. I think it all mixes together because all of these things. So the Student Pilot Bill of Rights is when you're a new student, or the FAA likes to call them learners, but when you're a new student and try to figure out how do I become a smart consumer of this aviation product I'm buying.
Okay.
But the myths and everything else are what continue after training can be done. And they are stuff that might occur during training also. So the myths and the debunking and trying to get you, I'm involved in a number of forums, and I'm always quick to say, well, let's go to regulations and see what that says.
Sure.
Because other people are exposing all of their opinions, but opinions are good. If you get to the regulations, you know the fact. And there's a live training that is the opinion versus the fact. And I try to help unwind some of that.
Sure. So what makes one a savvy student pilot? What kind of guidance do you have in that space?
The savvy student pilot is one who is proactively monitoring and tracking their own progress. Then they can get it by getting information from their instructor after lessons, but they know where they stand. Again, if we were to look at it as a road towards your private pilot or the safety net with the bicycle wheel, it's all, do you know where you stand and what your rights are as a student? The right to be able to get your status, to track it, to change instructors, to change schools, to go in and tell the chief instructor, this new instructor is not working and I think I just wasted the money on a lesson.
Yeah.
That takes a lot, and you have to have at least a knowledge of people do that. And the schools will respond. A lot of the schools want you to have a good experience, and when you tell them you're not, they want to fix it. But you have to feel empowered enough to tell them. So the savvy student has enough knowledge of what they're doing, what their expectations are, and the communications with their instructor and the schools in order to help match their expectations to what is being provided.
If you're going to make the most of this flight training experience, those are the things that you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you have for others as they're working through a possible transition into a career in aviation?
If you're transitioning into a career in aviation, and because there's so many different career options, I'm going to focus on the flight training aspect because
sure.
After
everyone has to do it.
Yeah, and after 2.5 months of cranking wrenches and working on my engine, I know I'm not going to become an A&P. So, that is part of this answer. There are so many different vectors you can follow for a career in aviation that you should not hesitate to try one, even if the benefit is to learn you don't want to pursue that direction. Okay, so that's one, is to try things to see where you go, hey, that's fun. I want more. And it could be as an A&P. It could be, if your age is okay, as a controller. I have a lot of respect for those guys. A flight instructor, you could, I have a friend, he tows banners. He just loves sewing the banners. And we talked about it, and, because every now and then there's some incident that occurs, and he's like, but it's just so cool flying because it's a J3 Cub. The doors are off. The wind's blowing every which way. He's like 1,200 feet off the ground, and he's just looking at the beach with everyone lying out on the beach. And he's like, it's just so much fun doing that. So that's where his career is going to be taking him, because he just enjoys doing it. So you never know which direction. If you go for instruction, there's multiple vectors you can follow for that, whether you go with a school, whether you're independent. Figure out what you want out of it. I know that I didn't want 5 days a week with students filling those days. I wanted 1 or 2 days a week with students, and that was it. And that helped limit me as far as, will I go to a school? But it kept it so that I could balance out what I want for my own happiness. And similarly, find a niche. Whether you become an avionics expert, go to some Garmin classes, learn their latest 750 and the 450, I think that's the right number, for the autopilot, and learn them really, really well. And go out and help. More and more people are getting upgrades to their avionics. They're learning how to do a lot of those things. And if you are able to facilitate that learning, it will help.
So we talked earlier about you've done some writing for aviation. Where can people find your writing if they're curious to learn more about the Bill of Rights that we're talking about, Savvy Student Pilot, things like that?
I publish everything on my website, timetoflyplanes.com. That's timetoflyplanes.com. And I have a number of articles in there. Everything out there is for free. And if I ever figure out how to do it, then I'll ask people to at least give me an email address so I can send them notes when there's new articles. But right now, it doesn't even do that. The Student Pilot Bill of Rights and a number of other things that I've talked about are out there. I have articles on selecting the right flight school, what way is correct for you. There's been a lot of debates about when to take your written exam. Should you take the written exam right up front before you start anything, get out of the way and be done, or somewhere during your training? So I wrote an article on that to offer the perspectives, pros and cons. So yes, I definitely have an opinion that it should be done after you have some flight hours. And I explained why I thought that would be a good thing. So yeah, the Time to Fly Planes has that. And after you start flying, a lot of times it's, okay, now that I have my certificate, should I buy a plane? I'd like to buy a plane. How much will it cost? And I did a number of analyses. I owned a plane with a partner for a while, and we were trying to do some work with a partnership. So I did a lot of analysis, and I have some articles in there about, well, what's the cost if you own it? What's the cost if you rent? What's the cost if you are a partner? But it helps you to see the costs and the breakdowns. And if you're looking for what's the most cost-effective way to continue flying, it can help point you in the different directions and help you understand the costs.
All right. Well, Gary, this has been an awesome conversation. We've had a great time. I've had a great time. I don't know about you, but I've had a good time talking with you.
I love talking about stuff, so I enjoyed it too. Thank you very much.
Sharing thoughts about the flight training process, being a CFI, all that jazz. So I can't thank you enough for your time. I can't thank you enough for your patience with my scheduling. This has been really fun. So, and good luck with your journey and towards your CFII.
Yeah, hopefully in 2 months I'll get to make an update and announce that I did it finally.
There you go.
And to you too with your CFI journey. Slow and steady wins the race.
We'll get there. Well, a big thanks once again to Gary for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. And I did mean it when I sincerely thanked him at the end. There was a lot of hiccups in trying to make this happen for scheduling, so I appreciate his patience in getting this to happen in the first place. So thanks a lot, Gary. We really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Hey, speaking of sharing stories, if you have a story or a journey into aviation that you want to share, I hope you'd reach out to me at flythetransition@gmail.com. I'd love to have you on the program so we can share your story and help inspire others as they consider a career in aviation. And if you've been inspired by this episode or you think it would inspire others, I encourage you to share this far and wide. Leave me a rating and review. That is the best way to help the algorithms pick up the podcast and share it with others. And make sure you leave that 5-star rating. And if you leave a review, I'd be happy to read it on a future episode. And if you're looking for ways to support the podcast, you can check us out over on Patreon, which is patreon.com/flyingmidwest. There's a number of levels that you can join. You'll get access to exclusive content, early releases, and much more. So hope you'll join us over on Patreon. You can also join us in our Discord community. If you send me an email, I will give you a link to that. And if you're looking to represent your favorite aviation podcast, which I'm assuming is this one, at AirVenture or your next summer event, check out some of our merchandise at flyingmidwest.com/merch. And you can find the latest and greatest in Fly the Transition and other Flying Midwest media merchandise. All right, I think that is all the housekeeping things. So thank you once again for joining me on yet another episode of Fly the Transition. And until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.